The finest hours of the Second World War. The road to Tokyo. (1942). Guadalcanal, in the Solomon Islands, is 145 kilometers long and 40 kilometers wide, and most of it is covered in thick jungle. Japanese soldiers start to build a landing strip on the island. Meanwhile, more than 3,000 kilometers away, U.S. Marines arrive at Wellington in New Zealand to begin training for the forthcoming campaign in the Pacific. Many are young, untrained men with little military experience and don't expect to go into action for some months. The plans of the Allied General Staff center on stopping the Japanese advance in the South and Southeast Pacific and occupying the base established at Rabaul in New Britain, used as a springboard for various raids. To achieve this, Nimitz and MacArthur, together with their advisors, draw up Operation Watchover, which will start at the start of July. The aim is to occupy the Solomon Islands, and with this in mind, Vice Admiral Gormley has been instructed to establish his base in New Zealand. But suddenly, the time given to preparation of the counteroffensive is drastically reduced. A U.S. reconnaissance plane has spotted the Japanese landing strip on Guadalcanal. There is panic at Nimitz headquarters. An enemy base at Guadalcanal puts at risk the plans for the Solomon Islands and seriously threatens the Allied position at Port Moresby. There is no option but to attack and take Guadalcanal before the airfield is operational. On the 26th of July, Chester Nimitz orders the 80 ships of the Pacific Fleet, commanded by Gormley, to set course from distinct points for the island. The mission is urgent. The landings are to be undertaken by the 1st Division of Marines, who have had only 2 weeks preparation. Very soon, many of these young, raw recruits were either dead or had become veteran fighters. On Friday, the 7th of August, the aircraft carriers Saratoga, Enterprise, and Wasp, commanded by Admiral Fletcher, take up position to the south of Guadalcanal, while Admiral R.K. Turner's cruisers and destroyers move into place near the small Savo Island. At nightfall, the Allied ships bombard the construction work on the airfield and the Japanese positions in Guadalcanal. At dawn, for the first time in the Pacific War, 11,000 Marines prepare for a landing on territory occupied by Japan. The American intelligence services estimate that there are some 5,000 Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal, when in fact there are less than 2,000, and only 240 of them are armed, the rest being workers. The Marines meet little opposition to their landings on the beaches. The few Japanese on the island have retreated and dispersed throughout the jungle. Nevertheless, the Americans advance cautiously, fearing an ambush. Split into two columns, they discover deposits with abandoned provisions and arms, which provide support for the hypothesis that the Japanese have fled. Slowly, the Allied soldiers occupy positions and on the second day reach their objective, the landing strip. They rename the airfield Henderson Field in honor of a U.S. pilot killed in the Battle of Midway. Meanwhile, other troops disembark on the smaller islands around Guadalcanal. In Tulagi and Gavutu, the Marines are shocked by Japanese suicide tactics. In Tanambogo, initially the men of the Imperial Army are able to push back the Americans, who, after heavy fighting, disembark 2 tanks. Unexpectedly, local people attack the tanks, grab the fuel bottles, and drag out the crews, dismembering them in front of their comrades. These, enraged, fire on the crowd, killing all of them. The Allied invasion has taken the Imperial General Staff and its soldiers occupying the islands by surprise. In Guadalcanal, during the first few days, the fighting is limited to exchange of fire and ambushes. Colonel Frank Goch and his men are the first victims of Japanese cruelty. A number of them fall into a trap and are killed in the fight, while others, taken prisoner, are beheaded. The Japanese command tries to respond quickly and places the troops being prepared for the conquest of New Caledonia, Samoa, and the Fiji Islands on maximum alert. The Allied landings in Guadalcanal force a change of plan. The Marines must be expelled from the island. On the 8th of August, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, in command of the 8th Fleet at Rabaul, puts to sea with 5 heavy and 2 light cruisers and a destroyer. At the same time, the Japanese planes hunt the aircraft carrier Fletcher. Mikawa intends to frighten the invading Allied forces, delivering a heavy blow that will put them to flight. The aim is to force them to call off the invasion of Guadalcanal. This risky mission has the support of Yamamoto. "I wish you the greatest success in your action," the Admiral comments after giving his blessing. The U.S. ships suffer constant intense attacks, which they try to repulse with artillery fire. Vice Admiral Frank Fletcher, fearing that some of his ships might suffer serious damage, withdraws out of range of the Japanese planes. At the same time, Admiral Turner pulls his ships back from the first line of protection of the landing troops. With their incessant attacks, the Japanese have been able to force the Allied ships to withdraw and disperse in the open sea. Meanwhile, Mikawa's ships take advantage of the situation and sail at full steam to take up position between the islands of Guadalcanal and Savo. The U.S. destroyers have not detected the presence of the Japanese ships. This time, it is the Allied side which is surprised. The ships of the Japanese Imperial Navy attack the U.S. Pacific Fleet with torpedoes and artillery fire, while their planes launch flares to light up the targets. The Australian cruiser Canberra and the USS Chicago are sunk. Mikawa's ships quickly head for the north of Guadalcanal and attack the Allied ships there, sinking 2 more cruisers, the Quincy and the Vincennes, besides seriously damaging the Astoria. In only 1 hour, Nimitz protection fleet has been eliminated, and more than 1,000 crew members are lost at sea. The Battle of Savo Island is a victory for the Japanese, which could have been bigger than Pearl Harbor if the cautious Mikawa had not decided to withdraw his ships so quickly, given that, at this moment, the Allied fleet was unprotected by its aircraft carrier. Stunned by the speed and force of the Japanese attack, the ships of the Pacific Fleet withdraw. However, Yamamoto sends his planes after them and, close to the East Solomon Islands, seriously damages the aircraft carrier Enterprise. The Allied fleet has suffered another heavy blow. In only 1 hour, the Japanese have destroyed the victorious spirit created by the landings at Guadalcanal. For Nimitz and MacArthur, the experience shows that the Japanese Empire won't be an easy enemy to defeat, and that future campaigns will be hard-fought affairs for both sides. The thousands of Marines of the 1st Division, under General Alexander Vandergrift, are alone on Guadalcanal. Without support from the sea or the air, and with a lack of provisions, working on the landing strip falls behind schedule. However, captured Japanese equipment that is still in working order is put to use to complete the work on the airfield, though occasional Japanese bombing raids continue. Yamamoto has been wrongly informed of the number of Allied soldiers that have disembarked on Guadalcanal, and believes that 6,000 of his best men will quickly be able to see off the invasion. On the 18th of August, the first 1,000 elite soldiers under the command of Kiyono Ichiki, a hero of the war against China, are sent to the island. Their demoralized comrades, running out of food and ammunitions, welcomed them liberators. Vandergrift's troops have occupied an area of 30 square kilometers, from the rivers Ilu and Tenarue to Kukum Hill, the location of the Henderson Airfield, Behind them is the beach. On the 21st of August, without any planning, Ichiki and his men launch a suicide attack across the Ilu River against the entrenched enemy positions, and are met with machine gun and artillery fire that results in a massacre of the Japanese soldiers. Upon receiving news of the disaster, the Japanese High Command realizes that the figure of 2,000 enemy soldiers is a gross underestimation. At the end of August, American ships re-establish supply lines, and the Marines finish work on the airfield. The first fighters and bombers arrive at the landing strip. The Allied soldiers are no longer isolated, and the Air Force provides a greater level of security, controlling enemy movements by land and sea during the day. This forces the Japanese on Guadalcanal to keep their distance from the Allied positions and to supply their troops during the night. Reinforcements and supplies reach the Japanese soldiers hidden in the jungle via a fleet of rapid cruisers and destroyers, which take advantage of their nocturnal incursions to bombard the Henderson base. The Allies give the fleet the name the Tokyo Express. In it, one of the most prestigious units of the Imperial Army is brought to the island, the Kawaguchi Brigade. Some weeks after the Allied invasion and the disaster involving Ichiki's men, the Japanese are planning their first important moves to retake the airfield. In the meantime, they continue their attacks by sea and employ guerrilla tactics in the jungle with isolated patrols. By the first week of September, General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's brigade has 7,000 men on the island. The Imperial General Staff believes it is strong enough to take control of the airfield by a land offensive with air support from the bases of Rabaul and Munda. On the 12th of September at nightfall, Guadalcanal becomes a place of torture. The Allied soldiers, in the draining tropical climate, confront the most dangerous attack to date. The Japanese launch themselves against the enemy with the fanatical war cry, "Banzai, Banzai." At the same time, their planes bombard the American positions on Henderson Field and engage Allied planes attacking from aircraft carriers. Kawaguchi knows it is a fight to the death. A group of Japanese soldiers try to take the hills around the airport. Vandergrift's men, pushed to the limits of their endurance, put up a heroic resistance and inflict more than 1,000 casualties in what they called the Battle of Bloody Ridge. The men of the Sendai Division, attacking in the center, break through the Americans' first lines of defense and reach the airport. But they are caught in lethal crossfire and only 5 men make it to Vandergrift's command post, where they are immediately killed. A 3rd Battalion of the Kawaguchi Brigade advance on the right flank of the U.S. position, but are surprised by bursts of Allied artillery fire. General Kiyotake Kawaguchi had promised his high command his men would take Henderson Field. But he did not have the men or the means in the last meters of the suicidal attack to gain the victory. After 2 days fighting, the Japanese survivors withdraw, leaving behind them 3,000 men of their heroic brigade. The Americans have suffered 500 casualties, but they have stood up to the fiercest and bloodiest attack to date. They have won a short respite, but soon conditions in the jungle begin to take their toll, and fever and malaria spread rapidly. Quinine is scarce, and in its place the medics give Atabrine pills, invented in Germany to avoid the spread of malaria. Many men did not take the pills because they believed they caused sterility, or because they could not endure the side effects of severe headaches and vomiting. In only the first month, malaria put more than 1,000 Marines out of action. In the following months, more than 8,000 will suffer. Without medical supplies, the Japanese were also hit hard by illness. More than 9,000 will die of malaria, beriberi, and dysentery before the end of the campaign. The attack by Kawaguchi's men has confused the U.S. intelligence services, who do not know the number of Japanese soldiers on the island. This makes the enemy seem more powerful and increases the fears of the Allied troops, who sometimes become completely disorientated in the middle of the jungle. Soldiers from opposite sides frequently run into each other and open fire against anything that moves, often hitting their own men. Sometimes they are forced to fight hand to hand with the enemy. On the 25th of October, the aircraft carriers Hitaka and Jayataka, accompanied by battleships and destroyers, engage the U.S. fleet off the Santa Cruz Islands and sink the aircraft carrier Hornet, as well as causing serious damage to the Enterprise. However, what at first appeared to be a Japanese victory turns into a disaster for the Air Force, which loses more than 100 planes and a significant number of its best pilots. At the same time, the fighting in Guadalcanal continues in a tragic game of hide and seek. On the 13th of November, the Japanese attempt a desperate large-scale landing on the island, which is repelled by Allied planes and rapid patrol boats from the nearby island of Tulagi. On the 30th of November, the Tokyo Express, under the command of Raizo Tanaka, the Tenacious, once again took the sea with 8 destroyers to land troops and provisions along the beach of Tassafaronga, opposite Savo Island in Guadalcanal. Shortly before midnight, the heavy cruiser USS Minneapolis, which enjoys the great advantage of radar, detects the Japanese ships, and a confrontation ensues. The much swifter Japanese ships sink the Minneapolis and the Northampton and inflict serious damage to the Pensacola and the New Orleans. With only the loss of the destroyer Takanami, the Japanese speedily withdraw to Bougainville Island. However, this victory was not enough to recover Guadalcanal. (1943). At the start of the year and having engaged in 6 important battles, the Tokyo Express limited itself to evacuating Japanese soldiers struggling to survive on the island and only just holding off the Allied attacks. On the 14th of January, the Casablanca Conference takes place. Roosevelt and Churchill, accompanied by their respective general staffs, establish as their first priority the defeat of the Nazis in Europe. However, the Americans want to keep the initiative in the Pacific. By the 9th of February, the Allies control the whole of Guadalcanal. The Imperial General Staff have called off the attempt to take it back, and in anticipation of future enemy movements, now concentrate on consolidating their positions in the Pacific. For this, they transfer a great part of the Rengo Kantai, the Imperial Japanese Navy, to the 2 large bases of Truk and Rabaul. The flow of supplies to the garrisons on the Solomon Islands has to be ensured, and the soldiers' morale and confidence in victory bolstered following the setback at Guadalcanal. Faithful to their tenacious and untiring spirit, the Japanese have built a large base at Rabaul in New Britain. From there, they plan to reorganize and maintain the defenses of their conquests in the Pacific. Meanwhile, MacArthur's strategic plan, codenamed Operation Cartwheel, centers on the occupation of this large Japanese base, isolating it by taking the positions surrounding it one by one. The road to Tokyo goes through Guadalcanal to the Solomon Islands, Rabaul, and Papua New Guinea, and on to the Philippines. It is what the U.S. general calls leapfrogging. On the 21st of February, the Marines disembark on the Russell Islands. The Imperial fleet, seeking to keep the supply routes open, continues to clash with the Pacific Fleet. At the beginning of March, an important naval battle takes place in the Bismarck Sea, in which the Allies sink 8 Japanese transport ships and 8 destroyers sailing from Rabaul to Lae in Papua New Guinea. In response to events, Yamamoto goes to Rabaul on the 4th of April to personally assume command of operations against the Allies. The admiral tries to keep U.S. forces at bay by developing an impenetrable defensive barrier and ordering continuous air and naval attacks against Guadalcanal, Savo, and Port Moresby. On the 18th of April, he abandons Rabaul for the air bases of Buka and Buin to coordinate the operations of all the forces in the area. However, U.S. Secret Services have deciphered a message which gives them the knowledge of this flight plan. The Betty bomber in which he is flying is intercepted and shot down by a squadron of P-38 Lightnings over Bougainville Island. The death of Yamamoto and members of his staff is a serious blow for the Japanese troops. The Imperial High Command has no one to match the Admiral in terms of knowledge and charisma, and his loss seriously affects Japanese war plans. Meanwhile, MacArthur and Nimitz push on with Operation Cartwheel. Vice Admiral Turner has been given command of the forces charged with taking the Japanese base of Munda on New Georgia Island to the northwest of Guadalcanal. To attack the city, the Allies disembark heavy artillery on the northern side of Rendova Island, opposite Munda. At the same time, groups of operational forces land 7 kilometers to the east of the airport. After 5 weeks of heavy fighting, the Japanese troops are forced to retreat to Kolombangara. U.S. engineers rapidly equipped the airfield at Munda for planes. Now, the main objective, Rabaul, is closer. The triumph in Munda coincides with the first anniversary of the landings at Guadalcanal. Once their positions are consolidated, Nimitz and MacArthur proposed to take Bougainville, the largest of the Solomon Islands, considered the central link in the chain being formed around Rabaul. The first move to take the island begins with a diversionary attack on the islands of Treasury and Choiseul. At the same time, New Zealand planes take off from the Henderson Airfield for Bougainville Island on bombing raids that help clear the road for the infantry. The area chosen by the Allies to land are the beaches of the Empress Augusta Bay between Torokina and Maraca. The Japanese, aware of the weakness of their own forces and the growing strength of the Allies, place their hopes on the warrior spirit of the men, trained to fight till the death. There are 40,000 of them on Bougainville, ready to repel the Allied landings. They can count on the support of 4 cruisers and 6 destroyers. In the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, the Imperial fleet loses a cruiser and a destroyer. The intensity of Allied fire forces the Japanese ships to withdraw, without having been able to stop the 3rd Division of Marines from reaching the island's coast. On the 1st of November, from the beaches of Cape Torokina, the Allied soldiers begin the conquest of Bougainville. Before them is the most savage and marshy jungle that exists in the South Pacific. Once again, the aim is to force the enemy to retreat in order to establish an airfield as soon as possible. On the other side of the island, the main body of Japanese soldiers waits for the order to counterattack. The Allied reconnaissance planes take advantage of the cover of night to seek the enemy fleet. They try to locate any movement on radar that could be a Japanese ship in order to attack and destroy it. Successive confrontations with the Americans over the months have significantly weakened the Japanese army, making it increasingly difficult for it to actively maintain the area of defenses known as the High Tide Line. On day 2, under heavy artillery fire, the Japanese troops entrenched on Bougainville begin the offensive against the perimeter of the area taken by the enemy. The fight continues for 4 months, characterized by bloody assaults in the thick jungle. But in spite of the tough resistance put up by the Japanese soldiers, Bougainville is occupied. It is another step towards Rabaul. Meanwhile, MacArthur's Australian troops, supported by U.S. paratroopers, continue to advance along the east coast of Papua New Guinea. The Japanese resist heroically. Far from their bases and without logistical support to facilitate a withdrawal, they fight to the last breath, defending their positions. Japan has lost the initiative and depends on the tenacity of its soldiers who, island after island, are forced to confront continuous waves of American troops disembarking from their modern landing craft. What is more, the experience in the jungle no longer gives the Japanese the advantage of the element of surprise, as, following Guadalcanal, the Americans employ native guides on their jungle patrols. On the road to Tokyo, the campaign now concentrates on the Central Pacific, with the naval forces under Admiral Nimitz and land forces commanded by General MacArthur. For the latter, the key to victory lies in attacking the enemy's weak points in order to eliminate his strongholds. Convinced the bullet with his name on it has not yet been made, the U.S. general, landing after landing, becomes a popular figure on the beachheads newly established. The big problem of the Central Pacific area is the great distance between its islands, which means that the support of aircraft carriers is essential to landings. The number of these has significantly increased in recent months, and thanks to this, Nimitz has drawn up a plan to occupy the Marshall Islands, involving the invasion of the Gilbert Islands, starting with Macon and Betio Island in the Tarawa Atoll, where Japanese activity is centered. The Japanese have been in Tarawa since December 1941 and have fortified it by building a great number of tunnels, which end in machine gun and artillery posts. They also have an airport and 3,000 elite soldiers, specially trained to defend the island. The commander-in-chief of the island is Keiji Shibasaki, a samurai and veteran of the war against China, who has persuaded his men that Tarawa cannot be conquered, not by 1,000,000 men, even if they try for 100 years. Keiji knows that it won't be long before the Americans arrive, as their reconnaissance flights are almost continuous. On the 13th of November, Nimitz orders 400 planes to bomb their targets without pause. It is necessary to keep the island's defenders in a state of extreme tension. The same day, a part of the Pacific Fleet sets course for the Gilbert Islands, being joined shortly afterwards by ships under Admiral Turner from Hawaii. 18,000 Marines of the 2nd Division, veterans of Guadalcanal and Tulagi, make up Operation Galvanic. The largest invasion force to date to take one objective heads for Tarawawa Atoll. On the 18th, a Japanese reconnaissance plane spots the enormous convoy. Shibasaki now has no doubts. After Bougainville, the next objective will be his island. Next day, the radar stations on the north of Tarawa report the presence of the fleet, and the Ki-43 Ayabusha planes take off. A few minutes later, the radio announces that the enemy has been spotted. At the front, flying in formation, hundreds of Avengers and Dauntless dive bombers, together with Grumman Wildcats and Hellcats, are approaching. Fire and smoke cover the morning sky from the air flights as the Allied Naval Attack Force closes in on the coast of Tarawa and begins a heavy artillery bombardment of the island. Day 20. In the early hours of the morning, the deafening guns of the ships and planes stop suddenly. Marines from the ships of the invasion force begin to fill landing craft. The commanders have given code names to the objectives on the beaches of the north of Betio Island. Red 1, Red 2, and Red 3. Those situated to the west are named Green Beach, and those to the south, Black 1 and Black 2. At 4 in the morning, the landing craft head for the northern beaches from the entrance of the lagoon that protects them. The information on high and low tides is a cause of concern for the commanders, as the landing craft full of Marines are able to approach a depth of 2 meters, and the depth where the reef is situated, which extends like a protecting barrier along almost the whole coast, is unknown. The soldiers approach the island with their eyes on the water, looking out for the coral reef barrier. In front of them, the island itself is covered in a thick cloud of smoke. Suddenly, the boats stop and they hear the noise of metal scraping on rocks. Their worst fears have been confirmed, and some of the boats have problems passing the barrier. From their indestructible positions made of concrete, the Japanese direct a deadly fire at the beaches, and the reef where the boats packed full of soldiers are stranded. The screams and the explosions continue while the Japanese batteries keep up an incessant barrage. The Marines that manage to survive jump onto the sharp coral rock and become sitting ducks for the Japanese machine guns. Some tanks, which have managed to cross the barrier, reach the beaches and return fire. By midday, most of the troops have reached beaches Red 2 and Red 3 and are in front of the Japanese first lines of defense. But the incessant shelling forces the Allied soldiers to lie face down on the ground. On Red 1, the situation is made worse by the deadly crossfire from machine gun posts placed along the coast. At the end of the day, of the 5,000 Marines that disembarked, 2,000 are dead or wounded.